My name is Michael Muhammad, and I have Asperger's syndrome. As someone with Asperger's syndrome, people with my condition are characterized by a difficulty of being able to relate and form connections with others. Throughout my life since I was a child, I have always found it very difficult to create friendships with others, to find people I could truly relate to. When I did find people I could relate to, I cherished them deeply. And I still maintain those friendships today, even as I'm an adult now, almost reaching the age of 30. For people with Asperger's syndrome, we are sometimes called emotionless, or that we have difficulty expressing emotion, or feeling emotion even. Perhaps this is a misunderstanding. I feel like it's ironic then that a game about forging connections and relating to others made me cry profusely like a child whose pet dog just died. Made me feel more emotions than any film, any piece of music, any book I've read has ever made me feel. As I completed Death Stranding, I noticed a few things. Most people have not completed Death Stranding. When you look at the completion rate for this game, it's under 20%. That's fairly unusual for a game that's been out almost a month now. If you look at the difference between the completion of Chapter 2 versus the completion of Chapter 3, there is a very marked drop in completion. Even from Chapter 1 to 2 to 3, there is a very marked, steep drop in completion rates for these chapters. That's because many people gave up on the game Death Stranding within the first 10 hours of playing it. As I first started playing Death Stranding, I scoured the internet for different people to talk about the game, to see if other people felt what I felt. Because what I felt was completely enthralled by the world of Death Stranding, very interested in its story. At one point, there was so much information being conveyed, I decided to take a break from the game, play a few matches of Call of Duty with a friend, and then I eventually went back to playing Death Stranding. I wonder if more people had tried to do that, if they would have enjoyed the introduction of this game a little bit more. Because as I looked for other people's opinions on Death Stranding, certain opinions seem to repeat themselves very frequently, such that the introduction of the game, the first 5 to 10 hours, is highly boring, or people did not feel like continuing the game. Some people said they sold the game without even playing 10 hours of it. People kept saying they simply were bored, or they found those first 10 hours to be a slog, and that they hated it. I found this difficult to relate to. In today's world, sometimes I find myself lacking in faith for the human race. We live in a world where wealth inequality divides more and more each day. In a world where people prefer to contain themselves within their own bubbles, rather than help or connect with others. It's a world where wars continue to happen, where barriers continue to be built, where it seems like humanity itself is a very primal species that even after millions of years, at its core, has not evolved very much. I often find myself lacking in faith for humanity itself. For someone like me, who has such misanthropic tendencies, for someone like me who views other people with a great deal of caution, unsure of whether they're just one of the you know, the bad people, the people I can't trust, the people who are just like everyone else, the people with short attention spans who care about nothing but themselves. Or if it's one of the good people, one of the people I could befriend and perhaps maintain a friendship with for a long time, someone I could relate to, someone who sees some of the same things I see. Most people are not the people I can maintain friendships with. For someone like me, who has such a negative view of humanity, Death Stranding was like going to church and having a sermon on the power of the human race itself, on the power of our cooperation together, and the power of us working as one in unison, rather than fighting with one another. As I completed the game Death Stranding, I scoured the internet for discussion with other people who felt similarly to me, with people who saw the same thing I did. As I scoured the internet, I found it very difficult to find anything I could relate to. Even amongst people who had completed the game, many of them had very different thoughts on the game than what I did. Some of them saw it as a game that should have been a TV series. Many of them said they did not like the conclusion. They did not like the messages of the game. All in all, finding people I can relate to when it comes to this game has been extremely difficult for me. And so, as I usually do, I find myself put into the position where, more likely than not, I'll have to make the video I want to watch myself. My name is Michael Muhammad. This is my review of Death Stranding. I believe that Hideo Kojima made one very important flaw in the way he chose to market and advertise and gain interest in the game Death Stranding. It's natural for someone like him to use his own name on the box of a game, to state that it was he who created it, because those who have played his games know that there is something special about a Hideo Kojima game. And that is simply that it has been indelibly created and touched and marked by Hideo Kojima. A Hideo Kojima game is unmistakably a Hideo Kojima game. Metal Gear Solid 5 does not have Hideo Kojima's name on the box, because it is not a Hideo Kojima game. It is a Konami game, which was written and directed and produced by Hideo Kojima, but at the end, Kojima was not allowed to create his full artistic vision. In Death Stranding, Hideo Kojima was absolutely allowed to create his pure artistic vision. I think that the best way that Hideo Kojima should have pitched the idea of Death Stranding to gamers should have been to more concisely explain exactly what he did, because I know exactly what he did. Much in the way that Hideo Kojima took his love of sneaking behind things and hiding behind walls to be unseen, to create a game where the entire purpose was not to be detected, primarily to reach an objective while not being seen by enemies. That was the creation of Metal Gear, and in many ways, the formation of the stealth genre itself. With Death Stranding, Hideo Kojima came up with the idea of a game centered around land traversal, where the primary objective of the game was to take as little damage to the cargo one is carrying as possible, while trekking across this very varied and oftentimes precarious terrain. However, to make the game more interesting, Hideo Kojima decided to formulate the idea of a world where every single aspect of that world heavily depended upon cargo being transported across this perilous land, but at the same time, every aspect of this world within that land being traversed was attempting to damage the cargo of the player. Let me break it down again a little bit more succinctly. Hideo Kojima is creating a game where the primary purpose is to transfer and transport cargo from one place to another while sustaining as little damage to that cargo as possible in a world where everything is attempting to destroy your cargo and cause damage to it and make you lose it. That is the concept of Death Stranding. Every other aspect of Death Stranding was built around this core concept. The concept of timefall, being rain that falls and causes things to age, and causes one's cargo containers to deteriorate themselves. This was centered around the same gameplay idea of cargo transportation that I described. The concept of mules that attack the player and try to steal their cargo is again another aspect of that concept. The concept that the player character themselves could die as many times as needed without any real negative consequences unless the cargo was irreparably damaged is again relating to that concept of a game centered around cargo storage. Again, the player's transportation is not necessarily the objective. The cargo's is. This is why, in the world of Death Stranding, it is difficult to even just trek the terrain. Death Stranding has been called a walking simulator and compared to other indie games that are also classified as walking simulators. Allow me to postulate that Death Stranding is the first walking simulator ever made, and that all of those other games are not walking simulators. They're movement simulators, in that most of the movement in these games is so simplistic and involves no actual footing or traversal of the land itself that the player character themselves may as well be an orb, faceless, just gliding or floating above the ground while traveling across it. This is not walking. This is moving. Death Stranding is a walking simulator. It is the first walking simulator. Maybe besides Quap. Perhaps we could consider it the first open-world walking simulator. Because walking in Death Stranding is very different from walking in other games. Your footing matters. The weight distribution of the cargo that you're carrying matters. This creates a concept where traversal itself is not so simple as holding an analog stick forward in the direction that one wishes to travel. Instead, in Death Stranding, traversal is a puzzle and a challenge in and of itself. This is a concept that I believe Hideo Kojima should have tried to more clearly present to people. What he did instead was to present the science fiction, the futuristic aesthetic, the artwork, the music, the trippy visuals, all of these things he conveyed to the viewer, which was interesting, but made people wonder what kind of game this is. Perhaps Hideo Kojima was afraid of telling people that Death Stranding was a walking simulator, because he knew of the negative connotations such a name might have. And yet at the same time, part of me thinks that if he was more straight up and honest about what the game is, perhaps Death Stranding would have been better received by an audience better mentally prepared to actually play the game Death Stranding. Perhaps with a better understanding that Death Stranding is a walking simulator about cargo transportation with psychedelic visuals and science fiction narratives and themes and art and a lot of just wavy, just like pop music, just really chill music of various genres throughout the game. I think that perhaps people would have been more receptive to Death Stranding. But that's just my theory. What do I know? I'm not Hideo Kojima. I haven't made any Michael Muhammad games as of yet. So, really, who am I to say these things? Perhaps Hideo Kojima did the best thing that he possibly could. And Death Stranding, by merit of being what it is, was always destined to divide audiences. For me, the experience of Death Stranding was one that I decided to take with no real expectations. I chose to simply think of the first 15 to 20 hours of the game as the tutorial. I was learning the many mechanics. In Tekken 7, certain characters have move lists that have over 133 moves. I thought it was astonishing to play a game where there were so many different moves that someone could do. In Death Stranding, there is a tips menu, which by the end of the game will likely have close to 1,000 tips. They are innumerous tips. You could fill a 300-page paperback novel with the tip section of Death Stranding's menu. There is a lot to learn in the tips menu of Death Stranding. There are many thousands of tips about the game in Death Stranding. All of these tips must be used effectively to actually complete Death Stranding. Otherwise, like most players, you will not complete the game. It's so funny to me that despite how much obviously there are gameplay mechanics here, all over, I think the Kojima Productions logo has moving gears because of all the moving gears that always exist within a Hideo Kojima game. Some part of me thinks maybe the human species just isn't ready for this game. I think Death Stranding will be replayed in 30 years and considered one of the most poignant works of arts that people have ever created in the medium of video games. But at the same time, I think it's a very futile exercise to explain that to the average person in a way that they can understand, because the average person simply doesn't care. The average person would rather buy the annual Call of Duty game, or Pokemon game, or NBA 2K game, or Madden game, or FIFA game, or whatever annual release of a game that they prefer, rather than a unique, iconoclastic, completely unheard of experience like Death Stranding. I will not spoil the ending of Death Stranding, but I found that the system of cooperating with other players to build a world around me was incredibly exciting. I felt such a feeling of fulfillment knowing that other people had used things that I had constructed, that other people had perhaps gotten further ahead in the game more easily because of something I had done. Likewise, I used many structures built by other people. This theme of collaboration is fundamental to the crux of why Death Stranding must be a video game. Death Stranding does not work as a TV show. It does not work as a movie or a book. Death Stranding is one of the most video gamey video games that has ever been made. By the end of Death Stranding, I felt I had gone on an incredible journey. I had felt various emotions. I had felt all sorts of things for this world, but nothing could have prepared me for the finale of Death Stranding. I spent the last 30 minutes of the game in tears, and by the time the end credits rolled, I was pretty much sobbing uncontrollably, but I was smiling at the same time. Death Stranding has a political message that may be disagreeable to some. I think this is a very pro-life game. I think this is a game that strongly supports the idea of heteronormative societies and, population rebuilding. This may be because Hideo Kojima is from a country that is currently facing a population crisis. I really don't know, but I think it's not inaccurate to say that Death Stranding is the most pro-life game ever made. Death Stranding has some incredible performances, by great actors such as Mads Mikkelsen, Tommie Earl Jones, Norman Reedus, Seadoux, Margaret Qualley, and Lindsay Wagner. Especially standouts for me are Mads Mikkelsen, Tommie Earl Jones, and Norman Reedus, for the amount of work that they put into the game, as well as just the emotional gravitas of what they performed in mocap being conveyed so beautifully on the game screen. There has been nothing like this ever in a video game. This is some Oscar-worthy shit at times, to be strictly blunt about it. Death Stranding was an experience like no other for me. It was profound. Death Stranding, to me, rekindled much of my faith in the human race. It made me believe that maybe even though a game like this isn't for everyone, it's most definitely for me. It almost feels as if I was waiting my whole life to play this game. I feel like I want to play it again. I feel like just doing things like maintaining my zipline network, or just performing deliveries in the game for fun, just for the heck of it. Because that's how fun I found the game Death Stranding. My one caveat would be that I don't feel the controls for the combat in this game are as refined as Metal Gear Solid 5, and that made some of the combat sections tricky for me. However, I think that perhaps on replaying I may find different ways to approach these combat sections, and perhaps the game will seem even better to me once I've figured those things out. Death Stranding is a game that requires a lot of mental digestion. It requires a lot of learning and attentiveness and focus from the player. But I think at the end of that journey is one of perhaps the most rewarding experiences ever in video games. A narrative that is profound in its hope that humanity could pull through and conquer the most dire of circumstances, and that the human spirit could conquer almost anything. Death Stranding is more than my game of the year. It's my game of the decade. And I will discuss some of these things more in a spoiler review. But for now, let me rate Death Stranding a strong 10 out of 10. A hard 10 out of 10. I don't think I'm ever going to change my opinion on this. And say that it's a game that really just changed my perspective on everything. I feel as if I could quit playing video games tomorrow, and chances are there may not ever be a game that I'll enjoy as much as Death Stranding made again for the next 10 or 20 years. I don't know. Maybe Hideo Kojima will top his own record one day. Maybe he'll top himself, who knows. I really hope that in time, more people will realize what an incredible video game Death Stranding was. How this game elevates video games itself as a medium. And see what I did. A true sermon on the human spirit's strength. A game about cooperation. A game that made me laugh. A game that made me angry. A game that made me jump for joy. A game that made me cry. Thank you, Kojima Productions. Thank you, all the actors and musicians who worked on this game. And thank you, Mr. Kojima. In many ways, I feel that Hideo Kojima worked out some of his own personal pain and grief from losing family members in his life in this game. And all I can say is that I'm grateful that he was able to take that pain and turn it into something positive. Because the core message of Death Stranding is that perhaps we do live in a world where terrible things could happen, but we can always take that pain and persevere and survive and overcome the trauma we faced and work towards a better future. My name is Michael Muhammad. Thank you for watching Death Stranding Forever.